Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring a topic that I think we can all relate to on some level, sensory processing. How we experience the world through our senses. And we're going to look at it specifically through the lens of autism,
Okay.
our guide for this journey. Excerpts from Autism and Sensory Processing, a comprehensive guide. It's a book that really gets into the nitty-gritty of, how our senses shape our experiences and how that relates to autism.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area of study and one that's often misunderstood. This guy does a great job of kind of breaking down these complex concepts into digestible pieces.
It does. And it's funny, I was reading through the source material and it made me realize how often I take my own senses for granted.
Hmm.
Like, have you ever stopped to think about how many different sensations your brain is processing at any given moment?
Oh, it's truly remarkable when you pause to consider it.
Yeah.
The way our nervous system takes in information from the world around us. It's this constant flow of sights and sounds, smells, tastes, touches.
Mm.
But what's often overlooked are the two senses that help us navigate our physical selves.
Okay.
Proprioception, which gives us that sense of body awareness,
Yeah.
and the vestibular system, which governs our balance.
And it's those two especially that the guide highlights as playing a huge role in how people with autism experience the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Your nervous system is like a complex highway system, right?
Okay.
Information from your senses is constantly traveling along those pathways, reaching your brain where it's processed and interpreted. But for some people with autism, those highways can get congested,
Oh.
leading to hypersensitivity, where sensory input feels amplified and overwhelming.
Okay.
Or in other cases, the flow of information might be more like a quiet country road, leading to hyposensitivity, where the brain craves more input to make sense of things.
Okay, so let's unpack these two scenarios a bit.
Sure.
First up, hypersensitivity.
Hmm.
The guide uses this example. Imagine walking into a bustling coffee shop.
Okay.
Now, for most people, that's just background noise.
Right.
But for someone with auditory hypersensitivity, each clinking cup, every humming espresso machine, every conversation, it all blends into this cacophony of sound that's physically painful.
And it's not just sound. It can be any of the senses. Imagine clothing textures feeling like sandpaper. Wow. Or the fluorescent lights in a grocery store feeling like lasers.
Yeah.
For someone with hypersensitivity, these everyday experiences can be a sensory minefield.
So it's not just about being, quote unquote, picky or sensitive. It's about the brain processing those sensations at a fundamentally different level.
Yeah.
The guide actually mentions a study that found
That about 70% of autistic individuals experience some form of hypersensitivity. And what's interesting is that it can vary from person to person.
Right.
Some might be highly sensitive to sound but not touch, while others might have the opposite experience.
That makes sense. It's about understanding the individual's unique sensory profile, right? And that brings us to the other side of the coin, hyposensitivity. This is where the brain craves more sensory input. The guide mentions how someone might seek out deep pressure. Think about the feeling of a weighted blanket.
Yeah.
Or they might be constantly fidgeting, rocking, or spinning, almost like their body is trying to generate those missing sensations.
It's like their nervous system is saying, give me more information. I need more input to understand what's going on.
Right.
A great example of this is...
But I was just reading about this. Apparently, there's a higher percentage of autistic individuals who have a higher pain tolerance. It's like their brain isn't registering pain signals in the same way.
Exactly. And this can sometimes be misinterpreted, especially in children. A child who's hyposensitive to pain might not react in the way you'd expect if they get hurt, which can lead to misunderstandings.
So we've got these two very different ways of experiencing the world, hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. And it seems like both can create some significant challenges in navigating everyday life. The guide specifically mentions
Social interactions, learning environments, emotional regulation. These are all areas that can be profoundly impacted by sensory processing differences.
Yeah. It's almost like having two completely different operating systems trying to navigate the same world. And I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about social interactions being particularly challenging.
Yeah.
I can totally see how both hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity could make those situations really tricky.
Yeah, let's take the example of a family dinner. For someone with hypersensitivity, all the different conversations happening at once, the clatter of dishes, the bright overhead lighting, it can be like a sensory overload symphony.
Right.
They might withdraw, become agitated, or even have what appears to be a meltdown.
But it's not a meltdown in the traditional sense, right? It's more like a sensory meltdown.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about being defiant or manipulative. It's a physiological response to being overwhelmed by sensory input. And on the other side of the spectrum, Someone with hyposensitivity might have trouble reading social cues or understanding personal space. They might crave close physical contact or seek out loud noises, which can lead to misunderstandings or even be perceived as inappropriate.
It's like their internal sensory compass is calibrated differently, and they're constantly trying to adjust to a world that doesn't quite match their internal map. The guide actually mentions a specific case study of a young man named Alex.
Yes, Alex had profound hyposensitivity to touch. He would constantly bump into things, crave deep pressure hugs, and even rub his body against rough surfaces to get that sensory input. His family initially thought he was just being clumsy or seeking attention, but once they understood his sensory needs, they were able to provide him with the support he needed.
So much of it comes down to awareness, right? Understanding that these behaviors aren't intentional, but rather a way of the brain trying to regulate itself in a world that feels out of sync.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the topic of emotional regulation, which is something the guide delves into quite deeply. Imagine, if you will, that you're constantly bombarded by sensations that are either too intense or not intense enough. It's exhausting, frustrating, and can lead to a buildup of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a sense of just how much energy it takes to navigate the world when your sensory experience is so different from the norm.
It's like running a marathon every day, just trying to process basic sensory information. And this constant state of dysregulation can manifest in different ways. Some individuals might become withdrawn and quiet, while others might have outbursts or difficulty concentrating.
This is where those strategies we talked about earlier become so crucial, right?
Hmm.
Things like creating sensory-friendly environments, developing sensory diets, and working with occupational therapists.
Exactly. These interventions are all about helping individuals regulate their sensory input so they can better engage with the world around them. For someone with hypersensitivity, it might be about creating a calming space with dim lighting and soft textures. For someone with hyposensitivity, it might be about incorporating activities that provide deep pressure or vestibular stimulation.
So it's not about trying to fix or cure anything. It's about finding ways to support the individual's unique sensory needs. The guide actually highlights a really interesting study about the effectiveness of.
Sensory integration therapy. Yes, it's a type of occupational therapy that focuses on helping the brain process sensory information more efficiently. There's growing evidence that it can be incredibly beneficial for individuals with sensory processing differences.
It's amazing to see how much research is being done in this area, and it gives me hope that as we learn more about sensory processing, we'll be able to create more inclusive and supportive environments for everyone.
I share that hope. But I think it's important to remember that sensory differences aren't just about challenges. They can also be a source of incredible strengths and unique perspectives. For
Well, we've
example,
heard about this. Didn't Temple Grandin, a renowned autism advocate who's also autistic, talk about how her hypersensitivity to visual details actually helped her in her work as an animal scientist?
she did. She was able to design more humane livestock handling facilities because she could see the world from the animal's perspective, noticing subtle details that others missed. And there are countless other examples of individuals with autism who've used their sensory differences to excel in fields like art, music, and technology.
It's all about shifting our perspective, isn't it? Seeing these differences not as deficits, but as variations that enrich the human experience. I think that brings us to a really important point, the role of empathy.
Empathy is key. And I believe that the first step towards empathy is understanding our own sensory experiences. We all have things that soothe us, things that irritate us, things that make us feel energized or completely drained. It's about tuning into those subtle cues and recognizing that our own sensory preferences are just that, preferences. They don't define the right way to experience the world.
That's such a powerful point. It's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to sensory processing. What feels good for one person might be overwhelming for another, and that's okay.
It is. And I think that by embracing that diversity of experience, we can create a world that's more accommodating, more compassionate, and ultimately more enriching for everyone.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive already. We've explored the science behind sensory processing, the challenges and triumphs of navigating a world that isn't always sensory friendly, and the importance of empathy and understanding. But before we move on to our final part, I want to take a moment to really connect this to you, our listener. We've been talking about these big concepts, but this isn't just theoretical. Think back to a time when a sound or a smell, even the lighting in a room, completely changed your mood.
Yeah, we all have those moments.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that these everyday experiences can offer a glimpse into what it might be like for someone with autism whose sensory world is often magnified or diminished.
So true. It's like a little empathy exercise, right?
Yeah.
Like if that much noise bothered me, imagine how someone with heightened sensitivity feels in a noisy environment every single day.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a starting point for understanding.
Yeah.
And that understanding is crucial because it can guide us towards creating a more inclusive world. We've touched on sensory-friendly spaces, but it goes beyond just design.
Okay. So beyond the physical environment, what are some practical things we can all do to be more inclusive of those with sensory differences? The guide mentions a few, but I'd love to hear your take on this.
Well, I think communication is key. Simply asking, is there anything I can do to make this environment more comfortable for you, can go a long way. And really listening to the response, not just brushing it off.
It's about respecting those needs even if we don't fully understand them, right?
Precisely. And it's about being flexible. Maybe that means turning down the music a notch, dimming the lights, or offering fidget toys for those who need to move. Small adjustments can make a huge difference.
And this isn't just about autism, is it? It's about recognizing that everyone has their own sensory preferences.
Absolutely. Think about someone with a hearing impairment who relies on lip reading. Being aware of that and facing them directly when you speak can make communication so much easier.
Or someone who's sensitive to strong perfumes or colognes. Maybe reconsidering that extra spritz of fragrance could make someone's day a little brighter.
It's about shifting our focus from, what's wrong with them to how can I make this a more welcoming and accessible experience for everyone?
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so powerful. It's not just about understanding autism. It's about cultivating a deeper awareness of ourselves and the world around us.
And that awareness can lead to greater compassion, understanding, and connection.
Hmm.
We've talked about sensory processing in the context of autism, but the truth is it's a fundamental part of the human experience.
We all have our own unique sensory landscapes. And by acknowledging and respecting those differences, we can create a world that's richer, more vibrant, and more inclusive for everyone.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring this topic with you, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to continue their own exploration of sensory processing.
I know I do. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time, be kind to your senses and to the senses of those around you.